Yeah, it's rewind time.
Imagine this, you once owned a company named Spike Churnsoft. This was the company that developed a beloved game series called Budokai Tenkaichi. These were Dragon Ball fighting games that sat in players' childhood hearts. It was fun, and the mechanics were different and unique at the time. Of course, since Dragon Ball was one of the most popular animes in the entire world, it was an instant hit. This made both Spike and Bandai Namco, the publisher of Dragon Ball games, get millions of dollars in revenue from these successes. However, after the last game, Budokai Tenkaichi 3, fans waited 17 years until the next sequel in the franchise was released. This game was Dragon Ball Sparking Zero. Being initially announced at the 2023 Game Awards, fans were excited to see what the game had to offer, but sadly, the offer didn't last for long and fans started going away once the dust settled. This is Buff Ben. Today we're revisiting the real problems with Sparking Zero. Remember to like and subscribe, and let's get into it once again.
What the fuck is this piece of shit?
When Sparking Zero was announced, the hype was through the roof. Fans were expecting the glorious return of what many considered one of the greatest Dragon Ball game series of all time, Budokai Tenkaichi. Those games were messy, chaotic, and maybe even a little unbalanced, but they had heart, creativity, and scale. They captured the spirit of Dragon Ball perfectly, giving players the chance to dive into wild what-if matchups with a roster that seems never-ending. But when Sparking Zero finally dropped, that excitement slowly gave way to disappointment as players started noticing problems, and not small nitpicks, but core issues that drag the game down. One of the biggest problems comes from the DP system, or Dragon Points for short. To explain it simply, it's how strong the characters are on a scale 1 through 10, 1 being human level, while 10 basically being angel level. On the surface, it's meant to balance out team building. Every fighter has a cost assigned to them, so if you want to use God tier characters like Jiren or Goku's highest transformations, you'll burn most of your DP budget, forcing you to fill the rest of your team with weaker fighters. Meanwhile, smaller characters like Yamcha, Krillin, or Cybermen cost far less. It's supposed to encourage strategy, but in practice it doesn't work the way it should. The system isn't accurate because the DP value doesn't actually reflect how good the fighter is in-game. You'll find low-cost characters that are shockingly overpowered once you learn their kits, while high-cost characters sometimes feel sluggish, limited, or even weaker despite costing far more. What this does is create a broken meta where people simply abuse the cheap but efficient characters and ignore overpriced ones. It doesn't reward variety, it punishes it. And here's where it gets even worse. The DP system doesn't even make sense when compared to the canon power scaling of Dragon Ball. For example, Future Trunks and Android 17 are both set at a DP level of 6, which would put them on par with characters around the level of Super Saiyan Goku on Namek. But canonically, both of them should be far higher. By the time of the Tournament of Power, 17 was able to hold his own against god tier opponents, and Future Trunks literally fought Goku Black and Zamasu, enemies well beyond the strength of Super Saiyan 2 or 3. Realistically, their DP should be closer to Super Saiyan Blue levels, but the game undervalues them badly. Then you look at Frieza's final form, which has a DP of 7. At first, that sounds fine until you realize that Super Saiyan Goku, the very transformation that defeated that exact form of Frieza on Namek, is listed at 6. How does that make sense? The DP system is essentially saying that Frieza is stronger than the form of Goku that canonically beat him. That's not just poor balancing, that's a complete disregard for the story the game is supposed to be honoring. The weirdness doesn't stop there either. Pan from Dragon Ball GT is ranked higher than Sopovich with her DP level, which feels off by itself. Sure, Pan is talented for her age, but GT Pan is nowhere near a heavy hitter, and definitely not stronger than most Z-era fighters. Then, you've got Master Roshi, who's only ranked at 2 DP. On paper, that seems logical since he's an old martial artist master, but then you remember what he did in the Tournament of Power. Roshi held his own against multiple universe fighters, displayed insane techniques, and proved his experience made him much more than comic relief. In a game that's supposed to represent the entire Dragon Ball saga, putting Roshi at the bottom tier ignores his incredible contributions in Dragon Ball Super. And that's the real problem here. The DP system is broken both mechanically and canonically. It doesn't reflect how strong characters actually feel to play, and it doesn't match their established power levels in the anime or manga. When Super Saiyan 2 Gohan is treated as equal to Super Saiyan God Goku, or when Frieza is ranked above the Goku who canonically defeated him, it makes you wonder if the developers actually thought about the numbers, or if they just slapped random values on the characters. The result is a system that doesn't satisfy competitive players, doesn't respect Dragon Ball lore, and doesn't feel fair for anyone.
You don't want to be like this. This is disgusting. This is awful in every way. If I could kill it, I would. But I legally can't. But I've considered it.
Another letdown is the lack of real customization. One of the things fans loved about the old Budokai Tenkaichi games was being able to tweak fighters through skills and ability slots. It gave you control over how your favorite characters played, and it made experimenting with builds fun. In Sparking Zero, customization feels stripped down to almost nothing. You can't meaningfully change how a fighter performs. You're locked into the present move kits, with very little flexibility beyond a few minor tweaks. Even cosmetics feel undercooked. For a modern game, you'd expect multiple outfits, color palette swaps, and fun customization options to make characters feel like your own, but the system feels outdated and lazy. It's baffling that a game with so many transformations, fusions, and unique designs has such bare-bones customization systems. The campaign is another massive disappointment. Dragon Ball has one of the most richest anime storylines in history, full of dramatic arcs, legendary fights, and emotional stakes. The old Budokai Tenkaichi games created those arcs with a lot of detail, giving players cinematic cutscenes, alternate scenarios, and fun what-if battles. However, Sparking Zero's campaign feels shallow in comparison. The story mode comes across as repetitive and rushed, with less focus on meaningful storytelling and more focus on padding out battles. Instead of an immersive retelling of the Dragon Ball saga or creative alternate universes, we're left with something that feels like filler. For a franchise built on iconic story arcs, having a boring campaign is almost unforgivable. Updates have also been underwhelming. In an era where fighting games and live service titles thrive on constant support, players were expecting major gameplay adjustments, new modes, or at least meaningful quality of life improvements. Instead, most of the updates so far have been small patches or basic balance changes. Nothing about the updates excites the player base. Fans have been vocal about wanting fresh content, whether it's new fighters, extra customization, or even experimental modes just to keep the game alive. But what we've received feels like the bare minimum effort, and it gives the impression that the game is stagnating far earlier than it should. For a game riding on so much hype, the lack of impactful updates is killing its momentum. Online play is another sore spot. Dragon Ball fans dreamed of recreating their favorite fights with people across the globe, but the reality is far less fun. The netcode is shaky, which leads to leggy matches and frustratingly unresponsive combat. Matchmaking can take far too long, and even when you do find someone, there's a high chance the fight will be plagued with input delay, or they'll just straight up leave the match. For a fighting game, especially one built on flashy combos with cinematic finishers, bad online performance ruins the game. It doesn't matter how beautiful the game looks if every fight feels like it's underwater because of lag. Competitive players in particular are the most hurt by this, and it damages the game's long-term health. Also, most of the time, you're just playing against players with the most unskilled characters. Let's just keep on playing Broly guys and not anything else. Then there's the roster. Yes, on paper it's impressive, but when compared to Budokai Tenkaichi 3's legendary 160 plus characters, it feels like a downgrade. For starters, several fan favorites are completely missing. Where's my boy Super 17? On top of that, many characters that are present feel incomplete with limited transformation options compared to the older games. For a game marketed as the true successor to Budokai Tenkaichi, having a smaller and incomplete roster feels like a broken promise. And when rumors point to missing fighters being locked behind paid DLCs, it makes the roster feel like it was intentionally cut down just to resell for later. Also, I feel like half of the roster is just Goku and only Goku. There's like 60 versions of Goku in the game, so I feel like stating that the roster isn't as big as it thinks it is. I mean, come on man, these are just transformations, they're not actually different characters. Finally, the gameplay itself struggles with flow and depth. At first glance, it's cinematic and flashy, exactly what you want from a Dragon Ball game. But the longer you play, the more you notice how shallow it feels. Animations often lock you in place for too long, breaking the pace of the fights. Beam struggles and cinematic finishers are hyped the first few times, but they quickly go repetitive when you realize how much they slow things down. Transformations mid-battle, which should feel like the most exciting part of a game, instead becomes across as clunky because of how they interact with the DP system. The game works as casual fun, but if you're looking for depth or longevity, it falls apart quickly.
God.
And that's the biggest tragedy of Dragon Ball Sparking Zero. It's not just that the game has problems, it's the fact that it had potential to be so much more. Fans waited over a decade for a successor to Budokai Tenkaichi, and what we got feels like a safer, shallower version instead of a bold new step forward. The DP system is broken, both mechanically and canonically. Customization is almost non-existent, the campaign is weak, and the updates are disappointing. Online is unreliable, the roster feels incomplete, and the gameplay doesn't have enough depth to keep players invested long term. The game isn't unplayable. In fact, it's still fun in short bursts, but when you step back and look at the bigger picture, it's hard to not feel like this was a missed opportunity. These were the real problems with Sparking Zero. At the end of the day, what did we learn? That Sparking Zero isn't a terrible game. It's just not the game fans were waiting over a decade for. It feels more like a flashy starting point than a true evolution of what made Budokai Tenkaichi 3 legendary. If the developers actually listened to the community and fixed these problems, the game could still rise to its potential. But until then, it stands as a reminder that hype alone doesn't make a great Dragon Ball game. So what do you think? Did Dragon Ball Sparking Zero live up to your expectations, or do you think it's one of the most biggest missed opportunities in the series? Let me know down in the comments, and as always, thanks for watching. This is Buff Ben, and I will see you guys next time. See ya.
This is